Thanks, yeah. So this is February 28th, SIG automation meeting. So this is the agenda that we had, which was set up. So we had John. So I asked yesterday whether he could join. So he's here. So perfect. Thanks, John, for making it. So agenda is John. I think depending on the time, I think Fiacra, we do your demo, if you're okay. And then we handle all the other topics, right? So I think that the first part might go longer than 30 minutes potentially, but let's see, right? I think, John, I don't know how you want to handle it, but you can take the floor.
Sure. I need to, all right, I'm logged in on the room, so I need to log in on the, I don't want to display anything. If you just click on that link and display that, that's probably good enough.
Okay.
That's all. If I need to do more, I can log into the Zoom. So yeah, so excuse me. So this is what I was thinking about post, like basically, right? Porch was built with a broader potentially set of use cases in mind than we necessarily need for Nephio, and there's also things that we're just not using, and or there are things that were experimental. And so the first thing I wanted to do was obviously bring Porch into Nephio, which is done, and then start cleaning up things that we don't use. So if you go into that cleanup, scroll down a little bit. So there were a bunch of controllers that we weren't using. Now we might want to use them one day, or you might want to use some version, or some of them, like Clippy was an experiment, right? But that's actually, we're doing some of what Clippy, it's named after the wonderful, for those of you who are of a certain age, the wonderful days of Microsoft Word's Clippy. And because it would suggest things like, oh, it looks like you're writing a letter. And it would, and it was super annoying, which is kind of funny. But the idea behind Clippy was, okay, it can suggest packages. So we've already actually talked about doing stuff like this. Like, oh, you have a CR. We know that this package contains the CRD. We're going to add it to the set of packages. So anyway, that's kind of an aside. But function discovery, the idea was that, okay, you have a repository with functions in it. It can, as opposed to with packages, and then it can discover those functions, and then in your authoring tool, so the web UI is designed to be an authoring tool, it could use the function discovery to present functions that you could execute against packages. So those are some of the things in there, but we don't use them. The other pieces, root sync deployments, root sync rollouts, root sync sets are all, and remote root syncs are all related to integrations with config sync, but are a little bit GCP specific. They don't have to be, but at least I believe at this time they kind of are. So that's why I suggested we just remove them or move them to Nephio Experimental, where they could we could access them if we need them in the future for some reason, or want to base something on them really more. Similarly, the GCP specific controller, there's a couple of those that I built for the GCP. Well, the Fleet Syncs one was built for the GCP opinionated install of Nephio primarily, and we do use that there. So that allows us to sort of get an inventory of clusters that are within and other resources that are within your GCP instance, and then we can use those to do Nephio automation on top of them. So those theoretically could move to a GCP specific repo, but it's a matter of, I don't know that that's a high priority task. It would reduce in the Porch main repo. Number 3, so the task list. So okay, so Porch we talked a couple years ago, right? The idea, if you think about one of the goals of Porch and one of the goals of Nefio, I believe, is to enable different independent teams to contribute to the overall configuration of a given package. And to allow the collaboration between automation tools and human edits. So this comes into play typically when you have an automation tool which doesn't account for every possibility, especially if you're a packaged software vendor, like many of the folks on the call. You don't know every possible way your customers are going to try to deploy your software. And so you can build an automation, a Helm chart is what people do today mostly. You can build out a package, in the case of Nefio, that captures the basic use case. People can layer on additional automations that are relevant to their environment. That's the collaborative automation. So you have a package, we integrate IPAM, we integrate whatever that's based on your organization. But there are things that aren't worth automating because they're so rare, or that are break glass type of things where the automation is doing something wrong and a human needs to go in and override it. And so the way that's done with the GitOps model with Porch is the user can just pull that package, edit it, and push it back. And that's fine, except we have the classic problem with automation, which is that automation will come by and overwrite the value that the user did the override with, unless you have some extra metadata to identify that this is some sort of overlay on top of the automation. So that's a long precursor, but the idea of the task list, and the reason I'm explaining all of this is to explain why we're not using, how we're not using it, and the problem it was trying to solve, so that if we want to solve that same problem, we should think through how we might do that. So the task list was yet kind of an attempt to solve that problem. So rather than just storing the sort of latest package, it effectively keeps a list of transformations that need to be applied. And I don't know that it does a good job of keeping track of who, but it was an experiment to try and make this work. The idea being that you could sort of back up to a certain state, reapply the automation, and then roll forward, right? So when you do a kept package update, there's two policies. There's two ways to do it. There's one that kind of ignores the task list and just takes the latest thing and slaps it on top of what you've got. And then there's one that will roll back and reapply. So this is very similar to Git, right? You have these two kind of functions in a Git environment too. And so in that sense, it's not that useful because it's kind of replicating things we have in Git already, but it never really worked well. It was never really finished, I would say. And in fact, I had to go and change the kept CLI defaults at some point to stop doing the method that uses the task list because it was broken and wasn't working for it. And so it became, I switched the defaults from, I don't remember the specific flags, but I switched the defaults from use the task list to not use the task list. And so what I'm suggesting here is that it also has other problems, like it accumulates these tasks effectively forever. And so they become part of the KRM object and it becomes too big. It's not designed in a scalable way. So I'm just suggesting we rip it out. It didn't work right. We don't have the bandwidth to fix it. And if we want to address that problem, maybe we figure out another way to do it, or we revisit it when we have the bandwidth for it. Liam.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually playing with that there for the last week or two. It uses the patch command under the hood, John. I think it really only works in a kind of an append case, because it's just adding stuff, and then if you do anything kind of that is anything rather than very very simple updates, it gets confused and it loses track of where it is, and you just get into a mess.
Right. It's like an attempt to deal. You end up with conflicts potentially. Like it's an attempt to do something that wasn't fully realized. Let's just say that.
Yeah, no,
we use it for clones, not for package variants. We use it, right?
We have to. It's part of the API. The way that you do a clone is through the task list, which is kind of crappy. Like some of these things, I think are a little bit of workarounds for limitations with aggregated APIs. So if you look at, for instance, you know, the API server isn't quite a general purpose API engine yet. And so some of the things like sub-resources, we have issues like, what is it? So anyway, the like the lifecycle changes and stuff, like we can't quite do everything we want to do with the aggregated API, which is something we need to think about too. So what they did is to do a clone rather than having a clone method. You do an update and you add a clone task to the task list, and then it creates a clone, something like that. It's a little hokey, and it's got to do with declarative versus imperative. Like, I just don't think it's the right solution. But we might have to. You're right, Wim. We might have to figure out a way to do clone.
What I'm trying to say is that we are using it in some pieces are used for it. I think the clone is not so bad. I think from an implementation because you just do it once, right? So you get it and you. But okay, I mean, yeah.
But if the blueprint, so if you actually take if you use the blueprint and then have some deployments off that, and then move the blueprint on and have more deployments, it gets it very hard to keep track of what's happening. So if you, and anyway, that's not an easy problem anyway. So, but it might be, it's probably trying to do more than use a word I hate, the paradigm is possible to support.
I think where you're going is actually what I'll get to later is like the initial conception here was like put all of this stuff in the server, and let me take a note of what you just said, Liam, because like tracking the upstreams, I think is a particular function, and we sometimes want to do it, and sometimes maybe we don't. So like I have a suggestion later on some of the changes to get to that. We're still in the cleanup phase.
Yeah, and I think also probably reinventing a whole keeping track of things thing, and there's things like Git out there already. Maybe isn't the wisest thing to do.
Agreed. So that's why I thought we can clean that up. There's a lot of this is just simplification, right? Like let's just simplify things that that we don't use or need. And I did see that there was some. Sorry, that I should. Okay. Yeah, I can't see the comments, by the way, just FYI. So if you have something to say and you want me to hear it, as opposed to everybody else, you probably have to raise your hand. Okay, anyway, removing the function CRD. So again, functions for function discovery, there's a CRD to represent the function. We're not using it. I can see value in it, but we're not using it, and it's additional complexity. The idea here, again, gets back to like if you have an authoring tool, like a UI, you want to discover the functions that are available, you can register a repository of functions, and boom, they appear. And then the function CRD can contain information like how to call that function, and what the image is, and sort of the whole description. It's where the discovery lands. The package CRD, the idea here, which was never completed, was that a package. If you delete the whole package, you delete all the package revisions associated with it. So, right, it's a way to manage a collection of derivative packages. I don't know that we have use for that particularly, or that it adds enough value and it's not fully implemented. So I was trying to reduce stuff so that we could then take it to the next step and change how it works. And if the less stuff we have to deal with in that change, the better. So package being not really implemented, it was plumbed in to the API and stuff, but never actually implemented. So it's just dead code in there. Similarly, OCI support we're not using. There's definitely value in OCI support. It's a different backend. We have Git backend, we have OCI backend. OCI is potentially more scalable. But given the changes I want to do in the architectural improvements, the current OCI support maybe isn't what we would want anyway. So
it's more re-architects the OCI. I think I agree with that. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So in which so again, like I said, the cleanup here was like prep for architectural improvements. Strip it down to the things we're using, evolve those things, and then add on top of the new architecture rather than trying to bring forward a bunch of stuff we're not using into the new architecture. That's kind of the structure for that roadmap. So before I get into the architectural improvements, I just want to pause and answer any questions or whatever. Okay. So the eliminate hard dependency on kept, actually, we already did. Although, well, almost.
Not really, I think.
Yeah, you're right. We eliminated, sorry, let me take that back. It's bigger than what I was. Let's start with the first one, package revision to CRD. Okay, so here's part of the problem we have with Porch today. It was envisioned as, this API sitting on top of these repositories, and you make transformations through that API, and it can it represents packages directly, repository contents essentially directly within the API server. And so the Git is the source of truth, and the API server is just a surface to show and manipulate that source of truth. And that's why it's an aggregated API server, so that it can sit on top of that different source of truth than etcd. And that's basically working, but there are a few issues. I feel it too tightly couples to the back end, such that there's a sort of necessity that what's in the API server reflects what's in the back end. And so it makes, like, if somebody makes an out-of-band change in Git, we need to be polling to pick that up. The source of the existence of an object is based upon the presence of like tags and branches in Git or in OCI for that matter. I wanted to, this has led to some problems, right? Because it's so tightly bound, you can't rely on as much of the ordinary API machinery code. And in particular, the problem we have is that in order to do this and be sort of performant and not hit Git too often, Porch maintains an internal cache of a bunch of each package revision, and that cache has to be updated by the polling thread, as well as by controllers and people interacting with the API server. And you can run into some contention issues there. So that gets very expensive and leads to some scalability challenges. When you get 1,000 or 10,000 packages, you get them all in memory. You've got to continuously. I made a lot of improvements in this area. So like before, it was kind of like doing a lot of work in every one of those polling cycles, and I managed to do it so that I just look at all the tags, and if the commit hashes and the tags haven't changed, then I don't need to reload those packages. Right? I made a whole bunch of improvements, just basic optimizations in this code, but it's still one of the more challenging areas of scalability, and we're not even at what I would consider any level of scale, right? And so I don't see that architecture being able to continue. And so what I'm proposing is that we turn that around. And there's another issue out there already. Morton we had been talking about this for quite some time. But what I'm suggesting is that what we call a package revision today just becomes an ordinary Kubernetes resource. And rather than ever polling a Git server, it's actually up to an ordinary client, either the kube control or porch control or whatever client you have, to create that resource and point it at a branch or a commit hash or a tag. And then if we want to discover them, we can have a discovery controller that runs, but it's no longer holding a lock on some internal cache. It's just like any other discovery controller we have and reconciler we have. It's going to populate things according to some policy definition of what it considers to be a package. Today, the way Porch works is it basically iterates the whole tree. You give it a repository, it goes through the whole tree and looks for any kept files. And when it has a kept file, it says that directory must be a package, and it populates package revisions, and then it looks at all the tags, and it's very expensive. And I don't know that we're getting a lot of value from that, right? I don't know that that's really where the value is. So this is to kind of invert that, make the source of truth for package revisions the API server. The source of truth for package revision resources remains Git, but the package revision is a pointer into Git to which package revision resources should be part of that content. So that's kind of the architectural shift, and it makes us able to simplify a bunch of things.
Also here, I think, John, sorry to jump in a bit, but I also have the feeling that the way we use the Git tags and the refs and stuff like that is a little bit, or do you have that as an item? Because it's a little bit, it also alleviates this problem in my view.
It does. So today we have we keep package revisions. First of all, we come up with these crazy names for them that are derived from because we need a unique name. And this kind of fixes a bunch of stuff. We like the tagging, the opinionated version tags, all that stuff can be kind of addressed more easily. It doesn't even need to be a tag. It could just be like, I create a package revision, I give it a revision of any arbitrary, it could be a semantic version or whatever, and I point it at a particular commit hash or a particular tag or a particular branch, and that's it, right? So drafts in particular will be branches, but there's a bunch of lifecycle things we'd have to work through the details on how packages move from draft to proposed to published. Is it the same or is it different? I don't know. I haven't thought through all those things, but I believe that this would be a better architecture, and I agree it would fix that. And then you could actually create meaningful names for package revisions that you can refer to in, your package variant or whatever it may be, rather than right now we do it by package, repo, and revision, because that's the kind of natural identifier. But you could actually use names like other Kubernetes resources if you had names that weren't auto-generated. So the next one gets to what Liam was bringing up earlier, like how do we track upstreams, and so the idea here is we don't want to over for one thing, we don't want to be so tightly bound to kept as we are today. I think we made one step towards this because we removed all the R package commands. So now port control does all the, you don't actually need kept. You can use kept client side. You need a kept file, but you could actually using anything client side. But to further take this a step further, what I'm suggesting here is that we start to decouple the functions that kept provides into smaller kind of, by functions I mean functionality, not functions. The purposes, the things that kept does for us, we try to decouple them. Right now they're all together in the kept file. The kept file contains, it's used to identify that it's a package when we do that iteration through the repository. It's used to point to the upstream. This is a derivative of that package. It's used to list the pipelines of how we should execute or manipulate in a hermetic way this package. And we also even store the readiness and package conditions here because we needed them accessible client side as well as server side, which maybe we don't, right? If we do the architectural change we just talked about, those things move into just ordinary statuses in the API server, and that's part of the API server management process, not part of the client side process. So those are things we use it for today, but really, rather than having those all embedded in one big kept file resource, we could break those out. Those are independent functionality that we may or may not need in any given package. So when I create a package, I may not need to track the upstream. So what I'm suggesting is that upstreamness becomes a separate resource, and it's like a or it's part of this package resource. I don't know. It's like we'd have to debate the design of the specific APIs, but pipeline can be a separate resource that
I agree.
Tool that any tool can operate on, Torch or kept or some other tool that's integrated with some other ecosystem, right? Like KRM functions is not a kept thing. Customized uses them too. Like we don't need to be so tightly coupled to this particular CLI tool. If we break these things out into separate, well-defined resources that are that can be present or not present in any given package. That's basically the idea. And then we would essentially have no strong dependency on kept anymore, and we'd be able to not have a pipeline if we don't need a pipeline or use some other tool. So then those are kind of the architectural things that I had functional enhancements I wanted to do. So in particular, the redux of the package variant, we've talked about this a lot. That like
Sean, do you mind if I just how would you? Yeah, sorry for just jumping in, but how do you keep track then of, say, if an upstream package changes and you want to propagate those changes down into deployments?
So what I would do in that case is we would have an upstream resource. So number 2 there, let's see, I probably talk about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. The upstream identity can be captured, the second paragraph below there, can be captured in an in-package resource or in an in-cluster package revision resource. So, like, you know, I don't know the answer to that question right now. I think there's different options. My thinking is that we could, that upstream resource, we would still have it. It's just, it wouldn't be part of the kept file, right? It wouldn't be part of a single larger structure.
Yeah.
It would be its own
Right.
thing. If you don't have it, we just don't have it. If you need it, you can put it there and you can manipulate it like you can manipulate any other resource.
Yeah.
So I think there's still a lot of thought that needs
I
to
think
go
it should
into
be part of the, in my view, I mean, yeah. I'll show a demo next week, by the way, John, about all of this.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
But it
Yeah, I
should
don't
be
think this
part
is.
of package revision, I think. Yeah, sorry, tell us.
I,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah, I don't think this is straightforward.
Sorry, Tal has his hand up.
Yeah,
Tal, go ahead.
excuse me, my voice is a bit out. So I also have an experiment where I did not use kept. I do think there is a necessity for some resource in every package that has information about the entire package, right? So we can definitely do something that's port specific, right? Without it wouldn't be called a kept file. I called it a deployment resource, right? It's kind of a singleton resource, right? It has a kind, but there's only ever a need for one of these in any package, right? Having more than one doesn't make sense, right? So it's kind of a singleton.
Right,
and
but
yeah,
then that can be used for the package discovery as well, right? If we want to do package discovery in a repository, that would be what.
right. Right. And I think it's useful to have information there that's kind of bubbled up from the entire package, right? So the status could be something like, hey, we're completely specialized, we're done, right? So that could make certain queries much easier, right? Because if you want to go, one of our scalability challenges is when we're specializing, we have to go over all the packages and see, if conditions haven't been met. Right, there's quite a lot of processing to go there, and as you keep growing, if you have 1 million packages, right, you would have to go package by package and parse it and see if those conditions are met, right? So there's room there for optimization because you can bubble up. You can turn that into a simple Boolean, right? That would make it easier to parse.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the question is, like, does this get stored in my mind? Like, I don't know that we need to store it in the package, all of these things anymore. Some of them might just live in the API server, like in that that's kind of what, or it depends on what we mean by package, right? So I want to make sure we think about what is our metadata that we're using for our automation versus what are we delivering to the end cluster, and what are our requirements around interaction with what we're delivering outside of our pipeline. So one of the biggest problems with Helm is it's a full ownership model, right? It's the Helm chart owns it completely and nobody else can go in there and muck around. Now, maybe we're solving that by making extension points but are we recreating the same problem that it's a start to finish, we own it, and we own all the inputs. You need all the inputs up front from us to feed into our pipeline. I want to make sure we don't fall into that trap of making something that's requires it must own everything. Nobody else can make a change.
Right. So you didn't see my demo from 2 weeks ago, but I think that you've seen versions of it before. So what other thing I did is put everything basically in the back end into a SQL database, right? So it includes data and metadata. But another option is to actually just have all that metadata, which I agree with you is very important for that orchestration, which is stored elsewhere. So the package could only include the contents, so none of that singleton thing that includes data, but the metadata about the package can be stored not in Git, but in something else, right? So for all these kind of scalable, necessary orchestrations, queries and updates, they can deal with metadata that is stored in a more scalable backend. When you need the content, you can dive into Git and get that, right?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that like that's implying that we're no longer, there's no longer a Git only workflow. It's implying that all workflows need to come through our system, which might be okay if our system is extensible enough and integratable enough. I just want to make sure we're going in with eyes open, right? And that we know that that was an original requirement that maybe we don't have anymore, right? Like,
yeah, so I just want to point out that it's absolutely possible to do both, right? So for example, there could be this singleton in the package. So let's say somebody goes to Git and updates it, but our system knows how to read that and update the metadata accordingly, right? So,
Sure.
so it is possible to implement, right?
But we should make it generic, right? So let's not be, let's try not to be prescriptive on how something is that, because I mean, if we demand this resource has to be there, then we are basically saying this is the only way you can do something, and that's not a good property, I think. There should be various ways how people can use the system, right? But okay, maybe Vish, let's you go next.
So good to see you, John, after a long time. So, and one thing, so the kept file that you're talking about, will the kept project, which is a client-side project, will that continue to still have a kept file, or is it going to be removed there as well? I mean, I know.
So Justin and I have talked about this a lot last year. And I don't know what, you know, we had internal changes here. So I don't work with Justin closely anymore. Like I can discuss it with him. We've certainly talked about, I'll put it this way. This is a direction he would like to see kept go in general. So there's been discussion of like, maybe we just do something like this and make it kept 2.0 and just break compatibility with all the old stuff. But I don't know how realistic that is, like what's on their plate right now. You know, I'm like not part of that org anymore. Like we're pretty distant in a way. So I don't know the answer to that. I think that this community wanted to jump in and to the kept community and evolve it in that direction. There would be openness to those ideas, but again, I don't know how much.
Okay, so the plan of record, then I'll assume is they will continue the same path they have. Whatever, you know, if you go to the kept.dev, they talk about KPD files and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's only here we plan to change that. I see. Okay. Because I mean, so, we were just getting to begin our
point, right? In that if we want kept to keep working with it, we would have an issue by doing this, right? So so we would not only be, you could still use kept to run client side things, but it would be like more like we wouldn't have a kept file necessarily. So yeah, I don't know. We might be losing the ability to use kept at all if we do this, right? As opposed to, and that's something we would have to think about.
Okay, thanks.
But yeah, we could also maybe decouple kept from having the kept file.
Yes, exactly. Right. It could learn these new resources independent of whether there's a kept file or not.
Correct. Yeah. So I think because I prefer my goal or my preference would be to have multiple pipelines, because there will be many options in my view that and certain people have certain opinions about certain things, and we should allow those people to use it. But okay, that's my personal view. But let's continue maybe on the.
Because I was going to say we're just getting our head wrapped around using kept, understanding pipelines, and all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, at least when trying to go through that, it's sort of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You know, we got that aha moment there. So we're thinking we might not have it. So yeah, we'll see.
I mean, yeah, this is all, you know, like I think I've said a few times, like it's all a rough draft, right? Like we keep making drafts of what we want to do and learning from, and I hope we learn, right? Like it definitely is
Okay.
creative destruction.
So usually some of these things happen. Maybe I missed some of the points. Sorry. Was there any sort of like, you went to some consumers who were using kept file, and they were like raising some issues, like saying we have a problem with using it the way it is currently with all this? Or is it more of it's a problem that we will encounter in the system if we continue to use it?
So the specifics for me are really focused around the Nefio community's use cases.
I see.
Like these are there are problems that people have brought to us over the couple of years with kept and the way things are done, and a lot of the changes I'm talking about are around decoupling and reducing kind of reducing the requirements we put on consumers, right? So like the trying to reduce that cognitive load of what you would need to understand, right? If you don't care about upstream stuff, don't worry about it until you care about it, right? Like it's almost like it's just an evolution of like, wait, I don't actually need this functionality for most of my use cases, so why should I have to worry about it? I mean, again, these are suggestions. Like okay. It may not be the most urgent need, and it may be like, okay, we'll do that in 3 years. Like this is where my thinking is around some of the problems. Like we have, the discovery problem is separate from the function pipeline problem. So the function pipelines in particular, we had a lot of use cases around like packaged software vendors are integrating. A lot of the things that we solve in Nefio with controllers could be solved client side with like multiple pipelines, but the question I would ask is, do we care about solving it client side? And so like some of these things, this is a debate, right? It's a debate we need to have about like, should I just not do this in the client side tool anymore at all, and just do it on the server side? Like that's kind of what Tal and I were just talking about. Like, and what do I lose if I lose that client side flow? I don't, again, it's probably
ideally it's still both, I think, John, not because you still have people, if you want to, I mean, I'm of the opinion that not having a client side is not as good as so I think if you have the ability to do both, it's ideal, because you could probably start altering some packages and manipulating it and then get them to the system, or other way around is have some piece in the system and then do some of the things offline. Today, that's hard, right, at the moment? Yeah, right. I mean, you can, but yeah.
Yeah, right.
We
like
have to...
It would be cool to be able to render package variant client side.
Yeah.
Right? So if we architect it right, we could do that, and then we, and I think there's value in that, right? Like now you can generate a set of packages client side, and then just push those to your Git repo. You don't even need the server at all.
Yeah.
You get that same functionality. So those are different, and I think maybe what Wim said earlier, like let's not try to be too prescriptive. So part of this is, that's part of the struggle is trying to do it in a way that you can do it both client side and server side. The same resource needs to be processed in both cases. How do you do that? I think Tal was next.
Tal was next. Yeah. And
I'll
then
let Bala go first.
Okay.
Bala?
So, okay, thanks. So a couple of things. So from the documentation perspective, obviously today when we do the kept documentation there, we say Porsche as kept as a service. I think those talks will change, I guess, right? So at some point of time. So the other part, Jen, I was not very clear about. I was reading this. I got my head around the rest of the stuff, but I did not completely understand how today in kept we have mutators and validators, and there's a pipeline it goes through. So if we do not have the kept file, and then you mentioned that the pipelines can also be another resource that Purge interprets. So I did not understand that part. If you do not have a pipeline explicitly defined in a declarative manner, how does that work? If
you would declare it it's just instead of embedding it in the kept file, it would be a kind of its own.
Right? It would be a kind of its own.
Have
Okay.
multiple, and you could have 3 of them or 4 of them. Now, of course, then you have to ask the question, how do I sequence them? And maybe, so Wim has done some stuff where he has like he creates a dependency tree, right? And, so you can do, and that gets in, if you go into my functional enhancements, one of the functional enhancements is cell for function inputs. So cell, we use cell in package variant set, maybe in package variant, but definitely in package variant set. And what I described there is a way in which you could, one of the biggest issues we have with the function pipeline definitions is defining the input can be pretty challenging. And we end up doing weird things like creating this config map and or falling back on setters because we have to copy like propagate value propagation around and stuff, and it's kind of painful. So if you drill into that issue, you don't need to do it now, but later, what that does is allow you to sort of navigate the tree of the package to pick out any particular value and then feed it into a function. So that kind of solves a bunch of issues around value propagation and it would simplify a bunch of our packages. For example, where we're doing a bunch of like copying things around or using setters. Remember, we have this thing where we the cluster name has to propagate into the workload cluster, but it also has to propagate into like a package name, and it gets messy and it's not very expressive, and the apply replacements is kind of crude. Like apply replacements goes away with this. And because it's all structured with cell, you can use it to build a dependency tree. So you can actually go, oh, this function requires this value. That value is based upon this resource, so like you can kind of, and that resource value is set in this other function. So I need to do that one first, right? So like you can kind of build a dependency tree based upon the contents of those expressions. And then you might not need, or maybe you state as a matter of policy that you follow the dependency tree, everything else could happen in any order. And if you do that, then it sort of dictates how people make use of those functions. So that's kind of what this functional enhancement is about.
Okay. Thank you, John. I'll read this.
Tal?
Yeah, so first, apologies to Fikra. I don't think your demo is going to happen. It was pretty obvious.
He did the demo in the SIG Release Meeting, by the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. I've been pretty sick for a week, so I wasn't present in a lot of meetings. So I just want to clarify something more general, and I think there's a spectrum of approaches to what Porch represents here, and probably Wim and I, interestingly enough, the two co-chairs represent two polar sides of it, right? But as often we say, the truth is somewhere in between. But I do want to clarify kind of where my comments come from. So the idea of being very flexible, right, that we can do things both server side and client side, sounds great, right? But I think the cost and complexity and potential for bugs, with atomic updates and scalability challenges, I think is enormous. My approach has always been that to really run a very tight ship, right? The idea that we have a single source of truth, that we don't have drift, and that we can be confident in the resilience of the core of our system, right? And to that end, I think having as much on the server as possible would be best, right? Having one system that really is in charge of the consistency of the data. Now, yes, it means that every time, you know, anybody wants to do anything would have to go to the server. I don't think that's such a big deal. You know, I think the whole idea is that, you know, yeah, if you want to run and manage and do things with packages, yeah, you need a server. You need that piece of software running. And you need to interface everything through that, right? I don't think that's an impossible, you know, challenge to go through. And I think the advantages that it brings, I think, are very, very important to us. So I'll generally be pushing towards that. So I just want to explain everybody where.
I think where it gets trickier, Tal, that works when you're thinking only on the production side, but when you're thinking on the development side, that becomes a lot. That becomes a very big barrier or burden on the velocity of developers. So I think that's where a little bit of the tension comes in, is like when you can do everything client side. It's sort of like why Docker became popular, right? You could all of a sudden do all this crap on your laptop that instead, before you had to have like 12 systems with administrators setting things up, development environments, and it was, you know, and all of a sudden I can just replicate that whole environment on my laptop. Sweet, right? I can be in 30 minutes, I can have a complete working system and I can iterate quickly. So I think we need to balance those two things, is like, who is the customer, and how do we do it in such a way, like in a production environment, I think you can get away, maybe you want to get away with everything going through the server for the control and security and scalability. But how do you extend that down to rapid iteration?
So the solution, I think, is pretty obvious to me. It's just to have the ability to run the server much easier, right? So in my demo, I showed that in 10 seconds you build the complete code and run it, right? So, and it runs without having to have a cluster, right? Which is also possible. But if we need a cluster, you know, it could be a kind cluster running locally. The idea is, yeah, we do need developer velocity, but that can be achieved without having to go all the way to supporting a complete client-only data system, right? Which I think.
I mean, I also, there are use cases, and again, this is all like, probably it would be nice if we had product managers, not just a bunch of engineers on the call, right? Like, probably like somebody should do this analysis of like, how do people, if you lock people into server-side flow only, you lock them into the whole enchilada, as opposed to, oh, I want to make use of some of your tooling. I want to use it to generate a bunch of packages, and I'm just going to push those to Git manually and edit them from there, right? Like, so like it's again, it's like, I don't know, honestly, right? Like that would be ideally the purview of a product manager, to talk to customers, to do a thorough analysis of one of the challenges with a project like this is adoption, right? Like, and so if you can build an on-ramp to adoption that doesn't require changing all of your internal processes, then I think we'll have more success. So my other hesitation than developer workflow to pushing it all server is requiring people to a binary on-off switch. I either use Nephi or I don't. Is there a way, and it doesn't have to be being able to do everything client-side. I don't know. I'm just asking the question, like, we should think about it. Is there a way to provide an on-ramp where people can adopt piecemeal the functionality that they need, and then they can see the value in it, and then they can grow towards adopting the complete solution? So those are some of the things in my head.
Right. So, you know, we're engineers, not product people, right? But we know in engineering everything has trade-offs, right? Every decision you make has costs. You know, it can come with benefits, but there would be trade-offs. Again, I encourage people to play with my my experiment, right? Because it does have a server-only approach, but I think a very, very fast and easy one, right? everything comes with opinions, right? Even when we say clients can do anything they want, no, they can't do anything they want. We have, a package does have certain structures, certain things, certain rules, certain KRM types, certain models. We always have opinions, right? And if we want to turn this as little opinionated as possible, well, then you're pushing opinions in other places, right? For example, one of the big things I talk about is decoupling the backend, right? Allowing you to use backends other than Git, right? So if you're using backends other than Git, well, that's, let's say, storing everything in MongoDB, right? Well, that's a completely different workflow, right, for the client. But if you have the server in front of the backend, the workflow is always identical, right? The server takes care of talking to the backend. So you could say the trade-off there is that you make things much easier for developers because they never have to worry about the storage philosophy, right? The storage philosophy is handled by the system. So yeah, I think all the arguments we're making here for either side, come with trade-offs always that diminish some possibility on the other side. So yeah, the proper analysis would be to look at all of these different things in a matrix and see what you gain and what you lose with every decision we make, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, we're out of time, but yeah, no, thanks, John, for clarifying some of this stuff. But I guess my question is the last point, logistics. So in terms of bodies, to do the work, I'm hacking at it at the moment. But I guess there's quite a lot there that would require, require a good bit of background knowledge, potentially in the beginning, to get others up to speed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty challenging. I think that Tal might have some insights on the team, on the Google team's ability to contribute there from his part of the org. I'm pretty slammed on my Kubernetes stuff. I can try to provide some guidance, and like you were asking about I poked around for an hour or two yesterday or the day before on the make generate stuff, but I really had to get to other things. So I try to come in and jump around when I can, but it's going to be hard for me to provide a lot of anything much beyond oversight or helping with questions.
Yeah, no, understandable, and that's appreciated. But yeah, like that instance, so the make generator is broken. My objective was to potentially remove the function CRD as part of the cleanup, but to do that, I need the generation of the API working. So that scenarios like that, and trying to learn the code generate API and also the why was it forked 2 years ago, etc. So stuff like that. But yeah, I did try and get
Morton, if he knows, but it might have even been before Morton. Like that the Martin
yeah.
was the one I think who originally built Porch, and so Morton might not. Morton.
Morton,
Morton might not even know why Martin did that.
Right.
So I want to give a quick. I know we're out of time, Liam. I know your hand is up too, but I'll give a quick answer just to what John raised in terms of resources from Google. So the bottom line is this: we are victims of our own success. The great, I would say tremendous success of Nephio so far in terms of releasing, doing 2 releases well, meant that Google trusts the community right now to take care of this project. So, we've delegated as much as possible to the community. Now, with owning Porch, I think we need something like maybe a platform task force that would be focused on this. But the bottom line is that we're on our own here. We might get some consulting advice from people who worked on Porch in the past, but
sorry, somebody needs the room. I gotta go.
Yeah, and there you go.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John.
Yeah, this is an example of it. So this is ours, right? John gave this presentation today about the his ideas, but at the end of the end of the day, this is on this community to decide what to do, right? And if we keep Porch, if we evolve Porch, if we change Porch, if we, delegate something to maybe another open source project, that entirely is up to us. And yeah, this is a big decision, but that's the point. We're a grown-up project right now, and I think Google spearheaded it, but right now it believes that the community can do what it can, take it to the next level. So that's the reality.
All right, Liam, you still have something, or?
Yeah, I just also the other fact I just wanted to say that we probably need to keep some level of support for anybody that's actually still using or is trying to use Porch. So we also have to keep what's there alive to some level as well. That's just another challenge.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah. So next week I will demo a lot of this stuff, by the way. So we'll see. Maybe we can follow up based on that, and then we can see what we do, right? All right. So I think that's it, right? So thanks all for joining, and this will be continued for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Wim. Thanks to all.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
all.
Bye.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.